All right. So today, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about Wireless and how they have kind of pretty rapidly and drastically scaled their deployment using Cisco Meraki as kind of one of the vectors to help them scale more efficiently and scale more quickly without running into too many technology bottlenecks. I have with me here Steve Stanton. Actually, I don't know if you go by Steve or Steven, so I apologize if you don't like Steve. VP of IT for Wireless, who will be kind of working through some of this with me to talk about how Wireless has used the Cisco Meraki technology and the benefits they've seen from us. So thanks so much for joining us today, Stephen.
Sure, very glad to be here.
Give us just one moment. I am not able to hear Stephen, so let me check. I'm pretty sure it's just a computer issue on my end. Give me one moment here. All right, sorry about that. That should take care of it. So once again, Stephen, thanks for joining us.
I'm sure. I'm glad to be here. Hope people can hear me.
There we go. Now again, that was all on my end, so no worries.
All right, great.
So we're going to go through a few different things today. We're going to start with the quick introduction, which is literally what we're doing now. We're going to dive into kind of what is cloud-managed IT, what does Cisco Meraki offer, what does this cloud-managed IT concept mean, what does the technology architecture look like. We'll go through some of that quickly so you can understand sort of foundationally what we're talking about when we say cloud-managed IT solutions. Then we'll dive into the content that's more specific to Wireless and how Stephen and his team have deployed and kind of used this technology. We'll start out by talking a little bit about what Wireless is for those of you who are unfamiliar with them, and then dive more into the technology use cases and the value that they've seen. We'll do a live demo, which will actually, Stephen was kind enough to allow us to demo using the Wireless network, so we'll actually be looking at their live network. And then we'll talk a little bit about the product families that are in the Cisco Meraki portfolio, and then hopefully have some time at the end for Q&A. So to kick things off, I want to start by talking about sort of the technology architecture that drives all of this. Before we get into kind of what's being done with the technology, I want to talk about the whys and the hows so that everyone understands kind of what's underlying, what's creating these capabilities on the Cisco Meraki platforms. So the goal of the entire Cisco Meraki division within Cisco is to simplify IT with cloud management. That's the core kind of driving goal behind everything we do. There's a whole variety of different cloud-managed networking and IT solutions that we have sort of layered into that story. We have wireless, switching, security, communications, SD-WAN, mobility management, security cameras, a whole variety of different cloud-managed IT products that fit into this kind of solutions portfolio. We've seen this sort of take off pretty rapidly. We were acquired by Cisco about 4 years ago, and we've seen incredible growth both before and after that acquisition. We're among the fastest growing portfolios and actually one of the fastest growing acquisitions in the history of Cisco, which is kind of very cool for us. And we're actually reaching, this number's a little bit old, we're over 150,000 unique customers who are leveraging this technology and over 2 million Meraki devices, hardware devices online. That's not counting the systems manager, mobility management endpoint software, which would actually make that number drastically higher. So how does this all work? What do we mean when we say cloud managed? Well, in this case, there's sort of two elements to this. There's the communication between the device and the cloud and the communication between you and the cloud. So I'll speak to each of those briefly. Between the device and the cloud, you have this connection that we call mTunnel. And it's basically a proprietary tunneling technology that we designed to be secure and very lightweight. And what it allows is for every single Cisco Meraki endpoint, whether it's a device or a systems manager managed endpoint, to talk to our cloud securely, right, over a secure tunneled connection. And what that's doing is it's pulling down firmware information, configuration data, right, things like that, potentially security signatures on the MX security appliances, and it's shipping up monitoring metadata so that we can display it to our customers as far as what's happening in their network, who's using the network and for what kind of security events they're generating, right? All these different elements to kind of understanding what's happening in the network and in the IT infrastructure. So that's one side of it. It's important to note that the actual user traffic, if I'm on a network that's powered by Cisco Meraki hardware and I browse google.com, that Google traffic isn't going through the Meraki cloud. It's going directly out to the internet, to Google, the same way it would with any other implementation. The only things that are going between the Cisco Meraki cloud and the devices are that monitoring and management traffic, that kind of metadata and command and control traffic. So the actual user data is not sent through the cloud. The other thing that's worth noting is that if you disconnect from the cloud, if the device loses its cloud connectivity, it continues to operate, continues to do whatever it was doing before. It has a local copy of its configuration. It's going to keep using that. And basically what will happen is any data that we gather, any monitoring data we gather during that time, we'll just cache locally, we'll buffer it on the device, and then ship it back up to backfill that time period once we get reconnected so that you don't have this big ugly gray section of the graph that says, oh, we don't have any data. We're just able to maintain that locally and then ship it up to backfill that once we reconnect to the cloud. But the devices will continue to operate. They'll continue to do whatever they were configured to do. You just won't be able to modify their configuration in any significant way until it reconnects to the cloud and you can start making those changes again in dashboard. If you do make changes in the cloud dashboard while the device is disconnected from the cloud, those will take effect once it reconnects. So I've sort of led here into my second piece of this story. So I mentioned there are two components to this cloud management architecture. First one is that connection between the device and the cloud. The second one is the connection between you as the user of the technology and the cloud, right, the administrator. And that's the dashboard. That's the Cisco Meraki dashboard that kind of drives everything that we do here at Cisco Meraki. It's the interface for management, configuration, and monitoring of all Cisco Meraki products. And it's really your way of communicating with these devices. So it's where you do all your configuring and all your monitoring, and it's really your interface into the Meraki cloud. So with that, hopefully that's given everyone kind of a clear understanding, for anyone who's not familiar with Cisco Meraki, of kind of what we do and how this technology works, at least to some degree. With that, let's talk a little bit about A-Wireless. So A-Wireless, as some of you may know, is a certified Verizon retailer. So you may have actually seen their stores quite a few times and not known it because they're generally branded as Verizon stores. But there's quite a bit of information that we want to share with you about A-Wireless, kind of understand their use case, understand what they're doing, what's driving their technology adoption. So, Stephen, I would love for you to kind of chip in a little bit and kind of just explain, what is the core business of A-Wireless? What are some of the challenges that you face? What does your business look like as it's grown over the last couple of years?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So A-Wireless is a Verizon authorized retailer, which means all of our storefronts are branded as Verizon. We have access to support every Verizon customer under the sun, and we represent Verizon in the marketplace in just about every brick and mortar market you can think of. Really, our relationship with Verizon is very tight, even though we are privately held. And when Verizon moves, we move with them. So part of that was in our growth pattern. When I started about 5 years ago, we had 120 retail stores. And the trajectory of the market was to consolidate a lot of these indirect dealers. That there were a program called the Big Six at Verizon, and each of them had 300 to 400 locations. And then there were thousands and thousands of other smaller retailers, and that indirect market started to consolidate through acquisition, through merger, and we took advantage of that, and that's how you see this growth period of 120 locations to right now just below 1,200 locations. We went from about 10 states to 46 states in those. It's all happened in the last 2.5 to 3 years through several major acquisitions and a very large merger. And so it's been kind of a crazy ride. And when you ask kind of how the company works or how it looks, every year it seems like I'm working for a new company because we have to constantly reevaluate and rebuild our technology and our support structure to facilitate what was at one point 600 retail salespeople to now almost 6,000. So there's a lot that goes into that, and of course, as we'll get to, Meraki put a key role in that for us.
Great. And I see here that one of the things that you had called out that we kind of included in here is talking about that sort of technology creep as you expand and especially as you acquire. And I know I used to be a network engineer, full disclosure, before I joined the dark side and moved over to marketing. And I worked for a company that was very similar. We kept acquiring new companies, and that meant that that new company would have some technology infrastructure that we then had to either integrate with or replace, and it was kind of a nightmare from a deployment perspective, because every time we went into one of those acquisitions, we had to devote the man hours, the time, the energy to replacing all of their equipment if we wanted to keep it consistent. So I definitely am familiar with that struggle, if you will.
Yeah, it's been interesting because every time we do an acquisition, everyone on this call, I'm sure, if you've worked in IT for even a day, you'll have to raise your hand if the question is asked, do you have any technical debt? And that means any kind of technical issue you've got to overcome, or any sort of issues that might prevent, sort of best practice. And when you acquire an entire company, that seems to be very, very commonplace. So when we have all of these different infrastructures with a lot of unknowns, we've had some circumstances where we acquire a company and no one knows anything. There's no topology, there's no diagram, there's no documentation. So it's very difficult to get in and try to make do with what you've got in place. And thereby we've chosen through an acquisition pattern. That means that we standardize, and we when it set out, I guess, end of 2013 to pick that sort of unified platform for all locations, so that we could use the term rip and replace with all the networking equipment, and to have a single unified standard that we could secure and support efficiently.
Makes sense. So we've started to touch on a little bit of this, but one thing we always like to really understand is, what were some of the challenges that you faced when the technology solutions you were using previously, or even just general challenges that might not be related to any particular technology? Just what were some of the top of mind, either day-to-day or more long-term strategic technical challenges that you had?
Well, when you're opening at the rate of 5 to 10 stores a week, or you have a lot of older stores that need to be repaired, kind of the on-site presence is a really big consumption of time. We would have employees that we worked with directly, direct hires that would go out to stores, and as we scaled, we started working with third parties. And what we found was a tremendous variability in skill set. So when you needed somebody to run a Cat6 line from a desk to a printer or whatever it was, in Alabama, you might have somebody great, and you might go over to Missouri and struggle. And if you're from Missouri, I apologize, just picking an example. But the variability was very high. So what we wanted to do was find a solution that was simple enough that could kind of cater to that lowest common denominator, and would provide excellent uptime. So it was very complex. With our previous technology was a variation on either a Cisco small business router that had a Wi-Fi element for the retail location, or even a Cisco ASA that had a separate wireless component. Wireless was a big part of our business, and still remains, and even more so today. In our retail footprints, which are, for a perspective, are between probably 800 and 3,000 square feet at the most, we don't really need a ton of coverage, but we do need solid and stable coverage. So that's a challenge to manage the wireless networks and to manage the traffic on the wireless networks, especially when you have a lot of people in the general public that may drive by and want to borrow your access point to do who knows what. You've got to make sure that you've really got not only stable service, but you've got to make sure that you can secure and protect the network at the same time.
So one thing that I noticed on the previous, when we were talking about kind of the previous slide, is that your team has actually grown from 3 to about 15 people, which is phenomenal. But I also noticed that that still leaves you at, just north of 1 person for every 100 stores, right?
Right.
So what are some of the challenges that you see, or that you have seen historically there, around just not having IT in each store, or not necessarily having the hands-on resources? You touched on some of it from a deployment perspective, but if you could dive into that, I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. Yeah, the numbers of our staff, it's kind of interesting because 15 really is our support department. We have a separate systems administration and networking and security group, which is actually only 5 people. And if you look at the size of our company, and 6,000 users over 46 states, 1,200 sites, 5 users managing all of the networks is kind of ridiculous. But what enables that is that our support volume is so low that when there's an operational change that has to happen on our networks, our support team can get involved and kind of help with some of the basic work. And because our systems now are so simple and centralized to the point where you can make a change on a configuration template in Meraki and you can push it out to 1,200 locations, and it happens in a matter of minutes. So in the old days, you had to go do a CLI into an ASA and make a change, and maybe you had a tool that allowed you to proliferate it. You still had a lot of extra work to do, hands-on work. So, even support is about one technician for 100 stores, but from a networking management standpoint, it's far more lean than that, and we do it successfully because of the tool sets that we have.
Great. Well, that's a great lead-in, I think, to kind of that transition from the previous solutions that you were using into what you're doing now with the Cisco Meraki product. So walk us through a little bit of what that deployment looked like in terms of going in and putting in the Meraki equipment, both from a physical deployment and a configuration and kind of rollout perspective.
Yeah, it was interesting when it started. It was early 2014 that we really started doing our testing and piloting. And so we pick a technology, run it in 5 stores, see how it works. And every time we sort of had to architect what that technology could look like on a scaled basis. And every time it was, a couple of weeks to figure out how to get, a sonic wall approach or a traditional Cisco approach to really tweak it, make sure it was fine-tuned. And I actually got to the point where I had the proposal and the purchase order agreement, and I was a day away from handing it to my CEO for approval to go with a traditional Cisco approach with wireless adapters in it. And then I got a call from one of the folks that we work with that connected us with Meraki. And I had originally not considered Meraki because it was kind of this new thing. I didn't really understand it. But I had a really good call for about an hour, and they walked through a lot of what we're doing today. And I thought, okay, let's see how this works. I delayed the CEO about a week and got it in the hands of our senior systems admin, Joe, who went and set it up and had it running within a day and running well and smoothly within a day. So that was kind of a different approach than we had with the other ones. And it was kind of a leap of faith, but we knew that with Cisco owning Meraki that they would put the resources behind it. And within a week, I had taken it to our CEO, and actually the overall total cost of ownership over a 6-year period was lower than the traditional Cisco model. So he signed that quickly, and we immediately started rolling out to our first batch of stores at about 60 locations. And I think we had all 60 locations done inside of about 30 days. And that was all with working with a third party to remotely plug in the device. But because the configurations were all clonable, we never had to put the device on our desk. Our network admins never had to plug into it with one of those blue cables with the serial on one end, and we were off to the races. So once we did that, and once we had some sense of comfort with those first 60 locations, every time we did an acquisition or opened another store, it was just an easy drop in Meraki, and away we go. Networking became such a small part of the workload that we had to deal with. And so that's what our model is now. Every time a store comes online, whether it's new, acquired, we always budget in for a Meraki, our executive team. That doesn't even question it because it works. We've never had the stores complain about those kinds of issues that come up in a traditional networking environment. Aside from internet speed, which is something that even though Meraki has no control over that directly, things like traffic shaping and layer 7 firewall rules really help us use the best of what we do have. So that was kind of our deployment in a nutshell. And as you can see on the slide here, we are doing another 500 stores that we acquired in the middle of last year. Meraki was gracious enough to drop ship every device to the proper location, and we got a list of the serial numbers to claim and set them up. And now we're just waiting for remote hands to get there. And at that point, we'll just be up and running. So it's a very seamless, quick, and few touches kind of deployment.
All right, excellent. So we've touched on this a little bit, but one thing I would love to sort of get a little more depth on is, and we'll talk about cost savings in a moment, but one thing I would love to get some depth on is what are some of the key features? You talked about templating, you talked about some of the zero-touch deployment, and you talked a little bit about the traffic shaping layer 7 firewall as well, but what are some of the key features that really have stood out to you and kind of helped remove some of those day-to-day challenges and made kind of the operational nature of the network easier, and how have they done that?
Sure. I think it's right on the top of the list there. One of the big differentiators between anything else we saw, and this was especially key with the traditional Cisco, was auto VPN. So I don't know if the folks on the call are familiar with it, but essentially when you have a route going to a location and the dashboard knows about it, then it will build that route for you and generate that tunnel for you. And you don't have to go in and manually configure tunnels, and especially if you're trying to accomplish a mesh, which we had to do at the time given the type of voice over IP system we had. We had to be able to hand off call traffic between individual endpoints, not just between the hub of the VPN network. So auto VPN was a lifesaver, and on top of that, it allows us to do some split tunneling type of traffic, so we can manage all of our PCs securely with Active Directory and with some of our internal tool sets, but still allow them to go out to the outside world and have some semblance of comfort over the security levels there. So I would say auto VPN is definitely on the top of our list. One of the things we are still working on deploying, but I'm very excited about, is the ability to get 4G as sort of a backup, and that will even further enable us. So in a retail store, when your internet goes down, 20 years ago was kind of, okay, that's fine, but today nothing works. You can't function, and if you ask somebody in a retail store to do a manual transaction, they look at you like you're speaking some foreign language. So it really enables us to have sort of that redundancy of connectivity with 4G, which you can find just about anywhere. And AutoVPN can leverage that so that you can continue to maintain your services no matter where you are and no matter the I guess, state of your primary network connection. So it's a major feature for us.
Awesome. All right. Well, so one thing that Stephen has mentioned and that I sort of mentioned we'd be talking about is the TCO concept. So one of the key things that we really try to drive with this whole simplicity story and this simplifying IT model is it's not just about, simplifying it for the sake of simplifying it. There has to be some actual end result that's positive. And for the most part, that positive result that we're seeing comes in two forms. One is, better use of IT resources, so IT having to spend less time firefighting and being able to focus more on projects and kind of forward-thinking work. And the other big one is total cost of ownership. So we see a lot of our customers saying that, after factoring in all the time and the effort and the energy, factoring in the cost of the hardware, the cost of the licensing, and doing all those calculations, they see a significantly lower total cost of ownership with Cisco Meraki, both in terms of the technology itself and also what it enables them to do in terms of leveraging, cheaper internet links for connectivity with some of our SD-WAN capabilities, leveraging 4G, as Stephen mentioned. So, Stephen, if you could just talk about, and even in broad strokes, some of the key ways that it's helped to kind of drive down the cost of ownership of your networking and your deployment.
Sure. The cost of ownership and sort of these statistics you see are kind of alarming to the point where you think, is that even possible? But there are a couple of things that make it possible. And so the first is on-site troubleshooting with previous systems that we had was acrimonious. It was very difficult to, one, arrange, two, we had to send gear on site and coordinate. We end up with a lot of on-site costs and service fees that just don't exist anymore because the system's stable. It's sort of an all-in-one package. When we use the MX64W in all of our sites, sometimes augmented with an AP MR34 or whatever the model is, depending on the site's needs. But the amount of time that we're sending people on site and doing maintenance is very low. I would say out of probably the average of 2 to 3 internet outages we experience a week in our stores, maybe 1 or 2 a year is related to Meraki hardware, and it's usually because it's stacked on top of other heat generating things that they shouldn't be nearby. So in terms of the ongoing maintenance, it's very low, almost non-existent. And then the deployment costs as well. And actually what weighs into this a lot is the time of our network admins to touch the device and the time of the shipment and the cost of shipment from purchase to network admin to location and then setting up the install. It takes less time to install. So that's how you get a 70% figure. And the 80% lower TCO, and I actually see a question here, does the cost of licensing is included in here. So it absolutely is. And here's kind of where I get the TCO in terms of the comparison of a traditional solution, is that many of the traditional solutions, you buy the hardware, you get a warranty up to a period of time, and you can renew extended support, but once that device is done, it's done, and a lot of times you've got to pay extra to upgrade to a newer piece of hardware or something of that nature. Whereas with Meraki, the licensing essentially covers the life of that device until it goes fully end of life. So for an example, we started deploying the MX60W in the beginning of 2014. The end of life for that device isn't until 2022. So if we continue to renew the licensing, our cost of ownership goes down over that sort of over that period of time, because we're not doing a whole life cycle hardware replacement every 3 or 4 or 5 years. We now can essentially get double that out of the equipment that we're getting, and if the device fails within that lifespan while covered under a license, it's just a component of the service, as opposed to everything being centered around the device. So I guess that's really where I see a lot of the value, is not necessarily so much the technology itself, but the reduction of the opportunity costs that you have to pay with other solutions.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. For anyone who's curious about more details, I know we did have a couple of questions there, one of which Stephen answered. Thank you. But for anyone who wants to know more about kind of the details of how this is broken down, there will be a TCO analysis in more detail published on the Cisco Meraki website, along with a case study around how A-Wireless is leveraging this material. So keep an eye out for that on our customers page. So this is actually kind of the lead into our demo, if I remember correctly, the flow of these slides. This is what's called the organization overview page from Dashboard. This is just a screenshot of that. And what this is showing is basically all the different A-Wireless locations. Each green bubble here actually may represent multiple locations. You'll notice some are larger than others. That represents they're kind of grouped together because they're physically, geographically close. But this is kind of what A-Wireless's deployment looks like from a geographic perspective. So with that, I'm actually going to transition straight into that same page so you can see what this looks like. So if we zoom out here, as I said, Stephen was kind enough to let us actually demo the live network for A-Wireless. So here it is. We can, again, zoom in and out and kind of get a picture of what's going on in terms of global health. I do notice you've got an unlicensed device in there, so hit me up after the webinar, Stephen. We'll see if we can take care of that for you. But basically what we've got here is a whole series of different locations. And you can see if I mouse over a particular one of these green markers, I've got a series of locations and devices that are consolidated that way, so that as I zoom in, it starts to spread them out more, and I can nail down a particular location and dive into that. You'll notice that the colors also represent health. So it's very easy for us to see that something's going on over here in one of these locations. Looks like just outside Baltimore. There it is. And we can actually dive into that and see what's going on with that particular store. And in this case, the location appears to be down entirely. Now that could be because it's been taken offline. It could be an internet outage. It could be any number of reasons, but it allows us to go in and see very quickly, okay, well, we haven't been able to reach this store for 20 minutes. Which probably means there's an internet outage in this region. We can actually see there was another similar outage, so power or internet, most likely. So it's very easy, again, to get those global health views there. And hopefully I'm not terrifying Stephen by pointing out some kind of network down situation that he wasn't aware of.
No, it's interesting. If I can interrupt, sorry. What's interesting is that what I love about this map is, as many of you may be aware, if you're in the Northeast, there's just this gigantic storm going through. So you can almost kind of witness what the weather patterns are and how it's affecting, internet in the general region of the country, and we can really key in on that. And that's been really helpful, and it kind of lets me see where our risks are, exposures are, and dial into them pretty easily.
So now this, of course, is a cross-site view. This is what we call the organization overview page. Again, it shows all the different locations. And this is really useful from a monitoring perspective, but from a configuration and individual site monitoring perspective, we want to dive in. And you saw me briefly with one of these locations. I can either do it from the map, or I can pull sites up here. For instance, in this network list. I can expand this out to see more details about these networks. I can see them grouped by what are called tags, which allows you to group them by region or by, franchisee versus corporate or whatever it may be. And I can see the different devices in a particular store or across all my stores, all my locations. So let's dive into a particular location here. I'm just going to pick one at random that's got a decent amount of internet traffic. And we've now moved from the organization-wide view to the network-wide view. And one thing I want to highlight here is it's incredibly valuable, I think, to have all of this consolidated in one interface. So one thing that I used to run into a lot when I was a network engineer, and I suspect will resonate with a lot of you, is that every way that I wanted to look at the network or look at the data, I had a different interface for. So I might have some third-party network management or network monitoring software to look at the health of my overall deployment. If I then wanted to go in and look at the health of an individual device, I might have a different interface, like a NetFlow style interface to see what traffic is passing. I might have ping or HTTP or ICM or other type checks to see whether that device is online. And then if I want to go in and actually reconfigure that device or see data specific to logs on that device, I have to open up the device-specific interface. And there's all these different steps that require different skill sets, different knowledges, different interfaces. With Meraki, it's really all consolidated. And I think it's one of my favorite things about this interface and this infrastructure. So by jumping down into this particular site, we still have that organization kind of awareness here. We can jump back very easily, but we can also see what's going on in this individual location. So we've got a variety of different types of traffic that are passing. So I can see there's some SIP traffic, there's some Windows file sharing, there's some OneDrive, there's some, variety of different things happening here, some iTunes. And I can actually drill into that and see which clients are generating that traffic and how much bandwidth they're using. I can go back to this clients page and see the clients, whether these are devices that are, connected locally or connected via LAN connection, or they're wireless guests maybe that are connected here. And I can go in and drill down and see what those different devices are doing with the network, right? I can see the health of those devices. I can do a ping to see if they're still connected. I can apply different policies to them. So from a monitoring perspective, I really like that everything's consolidated in one place. And you also have the ability to view a topology. Now, for the A-Wireless stores, as Stephen mentioned, they're primarily using just MX and in some cases a switch to kind of extend the number of ports they've got available. So the topology is pretty simple, right? But if you've got a slightly more complex, maybe you've got a firewall, a couple of switches, 5 or 6 access points in a slightly larger location, all of that's represented here, and you can dive into an individual device very easily. Okay, here's my switch. Here are the ports. Some are providing PoE. This one's the uplink. I can go in and see the state of a particular port. I can go in and potentially reconfigure this port. I can run some tests on the cables. I can cycle the power, right? There's a whole variety of different things you can do. And again, it's all native here in this interface. So I'm perfectly happy to just drive through some of my favorite features and capabilities. But Stephen, if there's anything in particular you'd like me to show, please feel free to drive me in a particular direction. I was going to start with AutoVPN, if you're okay with that, because I think it's a great one to highlight. And as you said, it's something that really adds a lot of value.
Sure. Yeah. The only other one I'd recommend that people get a look at is the traffic shaping, which is something we use really to great effect. So if you looked at the client list before, I'm sure a lot of folks recognize the SEP device name, which is the traditional Cisco Unified Communications Platform. So that's a desk voice phone, and they're using that over a broadband internet connection with Meraki. And a lot of times that can generate some concern because of either jitter or some other type of considerations. But the traffic shaping has been really helpful in maintaining quality because it's like QoS, but it does almost like a protocol basis. So that's something I think people ought to have a glance at or look at if this is a concern for them.
Absolutely. Well, let me start there then, because I think that's a great point. So this is that phone, or one of those phones that Stephen was just talking about. And you'll notice a couple things. One is that we can actually look at the policies that are applied to this device. So this is kind of the effective state of what kind of firewall and traffic shaping and bandwidth policies we have applied to this device. In this case, there's what looks like a network-wide setting, and we'll see this when we dive into the traffic shaping, that's just applied to all clients that limits the amount of bandwidth they can use for certain kind of bandwidth-heavy services. But there's also a policy that says ignore any other filtering rules for SIP traffic and SCCP or skinny traffic. And this is really to kind of make sure you're not throttling any of that business-critical voice capability, and then a specific traffic shaping rule with certain limits for a particular destination IP that's being communicated with. And I'll show you what that configuration looks like, but from a monitoring perspective, here's how you can see the kind of policy state of this device. You can also see where that device is connected. So again, the concept of this unified manager is that you can jump from there and say, oh, this is the actual switch port that that phone is connected to. Here's the phone. You can take a packet capture on that port to see what's coming out of that phone, what's going into that phone. So again, that more holistic view. From a configuration perspective, we have this traffic shaping page. And this is where these sort of traffic routing and shaping policies exist. And you can see here, this is on the security appliance. But because we have this unified management console where you're managing switching and security, even though the client is plugged into the switch, you can very easily move between looking at the client and looking at the policies. So here we have these traffic shaping rules, and these actually correspond to the rules we just saw on that device. We have that rule for that specific IP address it's communicating with and what its bandwidth limits are there, as well as some DSCP tagging for quality of service. We have a rule making sure that we're not limiting SIP or skinny traffic, and that it's set at the highest possible priority from a DSCP perspective and from what's called a weighted fair queuing perspective. So this priority option is basically what the priority is that the MX, the security appliance, actually gives to the traffic as it's passing through. So if we have a bunch of traffic, if we're congesting that internet connection, what should we be prioritizing? Right here, this policy is saying prioritize voice traffic. This is the most critical thing for our network, right? We've also got some high priority set for these software updates and potentially, iOS updates, things like that. But we've also got a bandwidth limit set. So they're high priority, but we also don't want them choking up our entire internet pipe. So there's the bandwidth limit there. These can also be set asymmetric up-down, as you saw down here in this other bandwidth limit that we've got configured. So one of the things that's great about this is it makes it very, very easy to control what your users or devices are using the network for and how much bandwidth they're allowed to use to do it. So when you couple that with having that traffic information natively in the same dashboard, again, you see things that may be actionable, you take action on them, all without ever leaving this interface. On the AutoVPN side of things, actually, let me show you first the kind of health view of the MX itself. So this is the MX firewall or security appliance. This is the thing that lives at the top of the network. Looks like this particular network is running on an MX60W, which is a 1 generation old piece of hardware. So now, as Stephen mentioned, their newer stores are going in with the 64W, which has replaced the 60W. But they've still got the 60W in service. It's still working fine, right? As Stephen said, it's covered under warranty. It's all covered under the same kind of cloud license model. So they can continue to use this until such time as they want to refresh it or they need, some capability that's available in newer hardware. But they can keep using the 60W until it goes end of life in 2022, right? It's a long-term kind of investment. And we can see here the device is online. We've got 4 of the 5 Ethernet ports plugged in. This is the 60W only had 5 Ethernet ports. Some of the newer models have more. And we can see what kind of clients are connected to it. The W indicates this is a wireless capable model, which is why there are no access points, Meraki access points in the site, because the wireless is actually being served directly from the firewall. So these are the wireless clients that are connected right here. We can see the SSID they're connected on, their signal strength. We can see, there's a firmware update available that may contain some new capabilities or bug fixes. And from there, so we've got this firewall that's online that's kind of talking to our network and talking to the internet. And then we've got our VLANs configured, our guest and internal VLANs. And we've got port configuration of how those are actually lined up to the ports on the box. So we have that internal routing infrastructure. We have that internet routing infrastructure. Well, what about when we want to connect those subnets, those internal subnets to our headquarters or potentially other branches, right? And that's where AutoVPN comes in. And as Stephen mentioned, AutoVPN is incredibly powerful because it's so easy. It's something that I'll be totally candid, when I joined Meraki and I was being trained on this technology, I actually didn't believe them. When Ethan over in our support team, who was training me on the technology at the time, this was a number of years ago, he showed me how you configure this, and I said, nope, that's not how VPN works. I've been doing this for years. That's not how this works. It's so simple that it almost kind of challenges your beliefs of like how VPN functions. So hypothetically, if we've got a new site coming up and VPN is off, right? It's just this site is connected to the internet, but it's not connected to any of our other sites. From there, we can go in and set it up as a hub or as a spoke. In this case, it's a branch store, so it's a spoke, and we can connect it to one or more hubs. So we could add multiple, if we have two, regional and a total headquarters, if we had a data center and a disaster recovery data center, we can add multiple hubs here for it to connect to, and we can either have it go split tunnel, or by checking this default route checkbox here, we can actually have it full tunnel all traffic back to that hub. From there, we've got a choice of which subnets we're going to include in that VPN. In this case, the internal subnet is included. The guest one is not. Makes perfect sense. Guests don't need access to your headquarters resources, right? There's no reason that they would. And then down here, we've got a list of the remote participants, quite a few, because it is a decent-sized deployment, right? So we can change the number we want to see in one page and see a whole bunch of these. These are all the other sites that are connected and their subnets, right? And that's it. These organization-wide settings down here are for third-party VPN to a non-Meraki peer, so a non-MX, whether it's an ASA or another Cisco product, or it's some kind of cloud service, Azure, AWS, et cetera, a third-party vendor, whatever it is. And then you have firewall rules that apply specifically to these site-to-site VPNs, whether they're third-party or what we call auto VPN, right? But the beauty of this is, literally, this is the VPN configuration process. Spoke, select your spoke, select which subnets you want to include, save. That's it. If you do that at two sites, or if you bring up a new branch and you do this after it's already configured at the headquarters as a hub, you've got a VPN tunnel up in a matter of seconds. And it's going to continue to kind of scale and modify itself as you add more capabilities. So if you were to add a new store, or if you were to, let's say, change the headquarters, or you change your IP scheme because you've got a new ISP at the headquarters, or you've got a HA pair at the headquarters, and which changes the IP, the contact IP of the headquarters device. AutoVPN is going to see all of that, and it's going to automatically what we call self-heal. So these devices are all talking to the cloud. When anything changes, those devices will tell the cloud, hey, my IP or my contact info has changed, and the cloud will inform all of the VPN peers so they can automatically adjust and keep that tunnel up. It also means that if you were to configure a new store, you don't have to go back and reconfigure the headquarters, for instance. When I do this, I don't have to go to HQ and set it up to talk to this branch. Basically, you tell the dashboard, I want this branch to talk to headquarters. The dashboard actually updates the configuration of both the branch and the headquarters automatically. It builds all the crypto maps, NAT exemptions, ACLs, all of the underlying configuration for these tunnels automatically based on what you've done here, and then sends those down to be implemented on the individual MX devices. The only other thing that I will show on the switch side that I think is really cool is we have this concept called the virtual stack. We have physically stackable switches as well, our layer 3 and layer 2 switch lines that are kind of the higher end, or at least the higher port count. I don't know that anyone would really stack 8-port switches, which is why we don't offer it on the 8 ports. But one thing we can do is, whether you're looking at 1 switch or 100 switches, we have this list of switch ports. So if this network had multiple switches in it, it would still be all of the switches and all of their ports listed here. And they would just be delineated by the switch, either a name, or if no name is configured, the MAC address, like you see here. And you can select multiple ports that can be on completely different switches, or ranges of ports if we want. And you can actually edit those ports across multiple switches all in this interface in one place. So you don't have to do an int range command. You don't have to go in and script this out. You can go in and just select the ports you want, and you can actually search for them to be specifically the ones that are connected to certain types. So if we add the LLDP and CDP header here, this will tell me what they're connected to. I've searched for only things that are connected to Cisco IP phones. Select all, edit, and I can edit just those VoIP ports very easily and change the voice VLAN or whatever I want to do. So it's an incredibly flexible way of configuring switch ports across multiple switches. You can also clone these configurations. You can create what are called configuration templates for switches, security appliances, wireless, or combined networks of all three to allow you to create configurations that are used across multiple networks, multiple sites that you can then update. And basically, once you've created a template, you can create it based on the settings of an individual network you already have or a new network from scratch, and then you can assign devices or assign networks to this template, and if you change the template, all of those devices get those configuration changes automatically. Stephen, is there anything else that you think I should cover? We're kind of running low on demo time, so I want to make sure that if there's anything else you think would be good to cover that we captured.
You know, there's a ton of interesting things. I don't really have anything specific. And the only other thing I would say is that, you know, in some of the questions I'm looking at, there are a lot of people saying, can it do this and can it do that? And if the answer is no, I found a lot of times the little make a wish button in the bottom right is kind of your key to new features. So that might be worth looking at.
Totally valid point. So this is something that, I'll be honest, I sometimes almost forget the value of, because I've lived in this kind of Meraki world for so many years now. I've been working for Meraki for just over 4 years, so I almost forget there was a time that I had to use other solutions. But this is something really cool. It's something you've actually, if you've been keeping an eye on some of Cisco's other product lines, that's been implemented elsewhere, because we've seen such success with it in the Meraki products that it started to filter its way out into other management products and other interfaces. But what this is it's a button where you can go in and you can say, I wish this page would something, or I want to be able to see something. I want this feature. And what these do when you submit, and again, you can attach a screenshot to show exactly where you see a potential for something that would be more valuable for your organization, or something's missing, or whatever it is. This doesn't go to sales. This goes directly to the engineering team. I get them as well. The product marketing team gets them. The support team gets them. It's basically an opt-in list of all of development, all of product management, and a variety of other folks who are interested in these. So this is a way to get your feedback directly in the hands of, and in front of the eyes of, the developers who are actually building these products. And it's actually really cool, because we've had a number of features that were driven by this. We have Wish Analytics, where we'll see, you know, are there things a lot of people are wishing for? And we actually have a board here in the office and a instant messaging channel that we used internally within the office that list all of the wishes as they come in. So we can actually see, hey, that sounds like a really cool idea. We should implement that. And I've actually seen engineers send emails or send IMs that say, hey, I saw this wish come in. I'm going to take my afternoon and build this, because I think this would actually be super valuable for our customers. This is a great idea. So while I certainly can't guarantee that every wish gets granted, we get a ton of these. We do absolutely look at them. The engineers actively look at them. And it is not uncommon for you to see some of these get granted, especially if they're UI focused. If they're product capability focused, that may take a little longer, obviously, because then we're talking about changes that have to potentially be made to firmware. But on the cloud interface side, it's a great way to get your feedback in front of the engineers. So with that, let me jump back into slides. We're going to wrap up here and take some questions. So I've been talking about some of the capabilities, and Stephen has talked about some of the things that A Wireless has been using in their environment. But I do want to highlight the overall product family kind of ecosystem. There are 6 different product lines within the Cisco Meraki portfolio. MR Access Points, which was our original product line. It wasn't called MR back in the day when we first came out with it, but that's the wireless AP line. It's where Meraki got its start. From there, we got into the MX Security Appliances, which is a lot of what we looked at today. The MS Switches, which we saw some of as well. Systems Manager, which is our mobility management. You may have heard it called an MDM or an EMM product to manage mobile devices, laptops, etc. Our MC IP phones, and the MV Security Camera, which is brand new. All of these products are managed from that same cloud interface. So you notice that we had security and switching in that one site, in that same network container, if you will. You can actually have all 6 of these products in a single dashboard network, a single dashboard configuration container. So you can manage a whole site from security all the way down into endpoints, phones, and cameras in that one interface, and just jump around between sites very easily in dashboard. So what's next from here? Well, there are a few different things you could do. One is keep an eye out for that case study and TCO analysis that we'll be posting for A Wireless, if you want to see more details on their deployment and their TCO information. But you can also check out any of our products for free. So go to meraki.cisco.com/eval, and you can actually fill out a form to try any Meraki product. You can also check out meraki.cisco.com/blog to kind of keep up with what's going on, what's recent or what's new with Meraki, either from a product, a feature, or just a company perspective, right? What's happening with us. And your best resource for all things Cisco Meraki, of course, is always your Cisco Meraki rep. So you can reach out via the meraki.cisco.com/contact URL, or you should actually have an email reminder to attend this webinar that probably that should include the contact info for your rep as well. So if you have any follow-up questions, I would encourage you to reach out to them. With that, let's take some questions. I know we've been getting some rolling in here as we go, so let me see what we've got. Scroll down here. So Michael wants to know if there's a way to show how the cameras work in that dashboard. There is, but unfortunately I don't think I have time to do it. But the cameras are actually in the exact same dashboard, and basically the camera feeds that you watch there in dashboard in the browser. So I would encourage you, reach out to your sales rep, or check out the Cisco Meraki YouTube channel, and I think we've got some video demos there as well of how the camera works and how that integrates into dashboard. Great question from Terry. It's not a silly question at all. He said silly question, but I don't think it is. Terry's organization is very mobile driven. Is there a Meraki kind of tool or app for iPhone, for Android? Yes, absolutely. So there is a Meraki kind of dashboard app for both iPhone and Android, iOS and Android I should say, because it's used on iPads as well. Focused much more on the monitoring side. It's not really designed to be a dashboard replacement, but it's very, very easy for you to go in, and you can actually see camera feeds, you can see network device health, you can see client traffic, you can basically see your kind of health and status information and monitoring info right there in the app. Dennis wants to know where he can find instructions for setting up Meraki VPN or potentially a third-party VPN. If you go to documentation.meraki.com, that's where all of our documentation lives. So KB articles, setup doc, first time install, all that stuff can be found there. It's searchable. It should be pretty easy to find what you need. Let's see. Michael wants to know, again, are there ways to control which devices or users are allowed to use the VPN? There are, based on what are called group policies, which allow you to control what different groups of users or groups of clients can access or can do with the network, how much bandwidth they're allowed to use. So a lot of the stuff we looked at today, you can actually apply those things via group policy. And one of the ways to apply group policies is with Active Directory, among others. Daryl is asking, would you call the AutoVPN and QoS an SD-WAN solution? Not by itself, I wouldn't. But we actually do have a variety of other capabilities in the MX that we didn't really talk about today. So the MX is an SD-WAN platform as well as a security platform. We didn't really get into that today because it's not necessarily relevant to how A Wireless is using the solution. But you will actually see that we do refer to Meraki SD-WAN. The MX is the platform for that. So it has AutoVPN, it has VPN load balancing, policy-based routing, as well as what we call dynamic path selection, which is performance-based routing as well. So if you go to meraki.cisco.com/SD-WAN, you can actually learn more about the SD-WAN capabilities in the MX as well. Istiak, sorry, I think this Ahmed is his first name actually. But either way, question about converting configs from ASA to MX. We do not have a migration tool to convert an ASA config to an MX config today. It's something that I think I would love to build, but it's kind of hard because they don't line up perfectly. So it's something we may do in the future. Jose wants to know if he's at a disadvantage because he's still using the MR16 access points, which are a generation of hardware behind where we are today. I wouldn't say you're at a disadvantage. Cloud management-wise, they have the same capabilities. In terms of hardware, they're 802.11n, right? They're not AC access points. They don't have multi-gigabit. Like, they're not top-of-the-line, high-bandwidth access points. But if they do what you need them to do, I wouldn't say you're disadvantaged. It's the same as any other. If you buy a technology, like I buy the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 8 comes out, it's not that I'm missing out on anything. It's just I don't have the very latest and greatest. And in most cases, that's okay. So I would say unless there are specific capabilities, if you're running into issues with wireless performance, or if you don't have the wireless bandwidth you need, then maybe it's time to look at replacing those with some of the newer models. But if they're doing what you need them to do, great. Let's see. Michael wants to know if there's a report to show when circuits are down for SLA with a vendor. There actually is, if you have the latest version of firmware. Let me see. I don't know if, let me see here. I don't know if we have this on these units. It doesn't look like we're running the latest version, so we don't have it here. But there is actually what we call an uplink SLA report, which allows you to see when basically what the ping and latency, the loss and latency history is for an MX for that network, and see a percentage uptime over the course of a 2-week or month period so that you can track circuit uptime for your ISP, for instance. Charles wants to know how much control do you have over the device and do you have CLI access? So those are two very different questions in my mind. You have basically, you have full control, right? You own the device. You can pretty much change whatever you want to change. There is no command line. So in terms of granularity of control, it's not designed to give you every single knob and dial the way that something like an ASA would be. That's kind of the value of an ASA, right? Is you have that incredible kind of flexibility and ability to really customize the configuration. The MX and other Meraki products are not designed to do that, right? You have quite a bit of control over the features and the functionality, but it's designed to be easy to use. And that means it's all GUI based, no command line. We've tried to build as many of those capabilities and tools into the interface as possible so that you can pretty much do anything with the device that you want to do. But it's the way you do it is all through the GUI. All right, so I can take one or two more questions, and I have to wrap up and give the room to the next presenter. But let's see here. Lewis wants to know, do I need a new license if I upgrade equipment from, say, a mid-tier device to a high-tier device? It depends on which product line you're talking about. All the wireless access points have the same license. So if you have an old MR16, you want to replace it with like the MR53, which is our highest end access point, you just replace the hardware, your old license will still be valid for the MR53 because AP licenses are just AP licenses. They are not model specific. For other products, like the switches, the security appliances, those are model specific, just to use some examples. So if you replace an MX60 with an MX64, there is a new license for that, a different license for that. So when you go to replace that hardware, you'll also get a new license for that new hardware. So it just depends on the product line. And then final question. From Michael again. Michael's got a lot of good questions today. For the Meraki phones, the MC models, do we, meaning Cisco Meraki, provide the phone service or just the equipment? So we provide the equipment, and you purchase the hardware and then the license from us, and then you purchase the service from one of our SIP partners, and we help you do that actually natively in Dashboard, and you can absolutely port numbers over to those providers. All right, well, as much as I would love to answer all these other questions, I do have to run because Paul, one of my counterparts, is waving at me through the window going, hey, it's my turn. So thank you so much, Stephen, for joining us. Thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. Please do reach out to your Cisco Meraki rep if you have any other questions I wasn't able to get to, and feel free to reach out to us anytime to learn more about Cisco Meraki. Hopefully you learned something useful and you'll have a good day and a good weekend. So thanks again, Stephen, and we'll wrap it up here.
Thanks.